Key points. Pashtun Qawmi Jirga's significance. The three-day Pashtun Qawmi Jirga held in Jamrud reflected the deep anguish and suffering of the people of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa (KP), who have faced over 2 decades of conflict, militancy, and military operations. The event highlighted the heavy toll of violence, including thousands of deaths, displacements, and disappearances. Conflict and humanitarian crisis. The Jirga presented devastating statistics: over 76,000 deaths, 6,700 disappearances, and millions displaced, with many still homeless. The conflict has particularly affected the younger generation, depriving them of education and a sense of a future. Distrust in the state and security forces. Growing public distrust of the state and security forces was evident at the Jirga, with speakers criticizing the handling of the militancy issue and demanding that security forces leave the former tribal areas. This reflects the bitterness and disillusionment of the people with state policies and past negotiations with militant groups like the banned TTP. Failure of past policies and lack of clear strategy. The state's earlier decision to negotiate with the TTP, influenced by the Taliban government in Afghanistan, allowed militants to return home and resulted in a resurgence of terrorism. Despite efforts to counter militancy, the security forces continue to suffer significant casualties, and public confidence in their ability to protect the population is waning. Political instability and lack of coordination. The political instability and confrontation between the federal and provincial governments have weakened the state's capacity to address militancy. The decision to ban the PTM, a movement of young Pakhtuns opposing the TTP, was a controversial move by the federal government, undermining efforts to build public trust and resolve the conflict. Crux. The Pashtun Qawmi Jirga in Jamrud exposed the deep scars left by decades of conflict and the growing public distrust of the state's ability to deal with militancy in KP. Despite heavy losses and displacements, the state's flawed policies, including past negotiations with the TTP and lack of a clear strategy, have led to renewed militancy and instability. The lack of coordination between federal and provincial governments further complicates efforts to resolve the crisis, while banning the PTM, a group opposing militancy, only deepens the public's sense of alienation and frustration. Key points. Global shift from free trade to strategic trade. The world is moving away from the Washington consensus of free markets and deregulation towards strategic trade, linking innovation, national security, and trade. This shift has been catalyzed by China's economic rise and the subsequent loss of millions of U.S. manufacturing jobs. China's economic and military growth. China's integration into global trade, particularly through the World Trade Organization, WTO, boosted its economic power and military capabilities, leading to concerns in the U.S. about strategic disadvantages. U.S. response and America First policies. The U.S., beginning with Trump's administration, moved away from free trade, implementing tariffs on Chinese imports and focusing on rebuilding manufacturing capacities through industrial policies. This approach has continued under President Biden, signaling a long-term change in U.S. economic thinking. Global imitation of U.S. economic policy. European leaders, inspired by U.S. policy, are also shifting towards industrial policies to strengthen competitiveness, research, and development. Implications for Pakistan-India trade. Despite proposals for free trade with India, Pakistan's policymakers must be cautious. Historical trade imbalances and the technological gap between the two countries suggest that free trade could disadvantage Pakistan, creating a trade surplus favoring India. Need for strategic focus in Pakistan. Rather than focusing on free trade with India, Pakistan should strengthen its industrial base and innovation capacity to remain competitive. Developing a comprehensive industrial and innovation policy is essential for increasing export competitiveness. Crux. As global economic thinking shifts from free trade to strategic trade, Pakistan must carefully reconsider any proposals for free trade with India. Given trade imbalances and a technological gap, free trade could place Pakistan at a strategic disadvantage. Instead, Pakistan should focus on strengthening its industrial and innovation capabilities to remain competitive in a world where state power and strategic trade dominate global economic policies. Key points. S. Jaishankar's visit and the SCO summit. Indian External Affairs Minister. S.J. Shankar's visit to Pakistan marks a significant event, as it is the first visit by an Indian foreign minister since 2015. The visit occurs during the 11-country Shanghai Cooperation Organization (CO) summit, offering a potential platform for dialogue on shared issues. Shared environmental concerns. The article emphasizes air pollution as a critical concern for both India and Pakistan. Given their shared geography, the two countries face severe air quality issues, particularly in cities like Delhi and Lahore. Air pollution poses a threat to public health, with particulate matter contributing to heart and lung diseases, asthma, and other severe conditions. Collaborative solutions. Experts advocate for cross-border cooperation to address air pollution, noting that the issue transcends borders. The SCO summit could serve as an opportunity for both nations to develop joint strategies to combat pollution, such as knowledge sharing, adopting best practices, and learning from each other's environmental initiatives. Air pollution's impact. The article highlights the health risks posed by air pollution, including low birth weights, childhood asthma, and brain dysfunction. The polluted air in South Asia, exacerbated by 6 regional airsheds, is linked to millions of premature deaths, making this a critical area for collaboration. Call for regional engagement. A recent meeting in Nairobi encouraged greater cross-border engagement between India and Pakistan, focusing on long-term solutions like cropping pattern diversification and knowledge sharing to improve regional air quality and food security. Crux. As S.J. Shankar visits Pakistan for the SCO summit, both countries have an opportunity to address shared challenges like air pollution. With pollution affecting millions and crossing borders, collaborative solutions are essential. Experts recommend joint efforts in knowledge sharing and policy development to tackle the environmental crisis, which poses a severe threat to public health in both nations. Key points: UN's ongoing struggles with conflict resolution. The UN's inability to fulfill its primary mission of preventing war and maintaining global peace has been evident since its establishment in 1945. Structural issues within the UN, particularly with the Security Council, UNSC, have repeatedly hindered its effectiveness. UN Security Council, UNSC limitations. The composition of the UNSC, which includes 5 permanent members, US, UK, France, China, Russia, with veto power, undermines the UN's peace efforts. The veto system allows these nations to block resolutions, even when they are involved in or allied with aggressors, as seen in conflicts involving Russia, China, the US, and Israel. Calls for reform. There are calls to reform the UNSC, including expanding permanent membership to include countries from the Global South, such as India, Brazil, and Nigeria. Additionally, critics argue for limiting or abolishing the veto power to allow more democratic decision-making. UN's mixed success in non-military areas. Despite its failures in conflict resolution, the UN has made notable contributions in other areas, such as development, environment, and human rights, though even here, many resolutions and initiatives remain aspirational due to lack of enforcement or follow-through. Global leaders' role in peace efforts. Many global leaders, such as South American presidents, voiced strong pleas for peace at the UN's 79th session. However, antagonistic rhetoric from leaders like Israel's Netanyahu and Russia's Lavrov highlighted the persistent tensions and the UN's difficulties in promoting genuine dialogue. Israel-Palestine conflict and global response. Israel's ongoing actions in Gaza, the West Bank, and Lebanon, often supported by U.S. military aid, are seen as part of a broader campaign that echoes apartheid-like policies. Calls for international boycotts and sanctions, akin to those that ended South African apartheid, have been proposed as one solution. Crux. The UN's relevance in global conflict resolution is undermined by structural deficiencies, particularly in the UNSC, where veto powers and political biases block effective action. Reform of the UNSC and stronger global cooperation, especially in conflict zones like Israel-Palestine, are crucial for the UN to fulfill its mission of maintaining peace and security. However, the influence of powerful member states, such as the US, often dictates the organization's effectiveness. Key points. Polio surge reflects systemic healthcare failures. Pakistan's increase in polio cases from 8 in June to 33 by mid-October highlights deeper healthcare issues. The rise points to a lack of infrastructure and governance, particularly in regions like Balochistan, where immunization coverage is as low as 37%. Challenges faced in polio eradication. The government's efforts are hindered by disinformation, parental refusal, attacks on polio workers, and fake vaccination data. This erodes public trust, especially when environmental samples test positive for the virus in high-risk areas, despite claims of high coverage. Need for comprehensive healthcare approach. Polio eradication cannot be treated in isolation. Pakistan should incorporate it into a broader public health strategy. Polio workers could be trained to address other health issues like sanitation, nutrition, and maternal health, strengthening the overall healthcare system. Government responsibility. The government must prioritize basic healthcare infrastructure, especially in rural areas. This includes ensuring functioning health centers, routine immunization, and trained staff. Transparency is key. Local officials need to be held accountable for data falsification, and audits should ensure proper vaccination coverage. Community responsibility. Public health is a shared duty. Communities and parents must cooperate, recognizing that regular polio vaccines are essential to protecting children from lifelong disability. The government could also consider incentivizing parents to get their children vaccinated. Crux. Pakistan's polio crisis is a symptom of deeper systemic failures in healthcare. To effectively combat polio and other preventable diseases, the country must prioritize healthcare infrastructure, improve transparency, and integrate polio eradication into a broader public health strategy that involves both government and community cooperation. Key points. Foreign lenders' plan for public universities. A proposal backed by an international lending agency suggests converting public universities into self-sustainable corporate entities. This transformation plan could defund these institutions, pushing them to raise student fees, which may exclude lower-income students from accessing higher education. Positive and negative aspects. While the plan includes beneficial elements, such as improving education quality and reducing administrative bloat, the most alarming part is the potential elimination of government funding. This would make public universities less affordable for middle and working class students, risking their educational aspirations. Impact on lower-income students. Public universities are often the only affordable options for students from financially modest backgrounds. By raising fees without government support, the plan might bar these students from pursuing higher education, reinforcing educational inequality. Alternative solutions for university funding. Instead of eliminating government funding, universities could explore other revenue sources like smart investments, land utilization, and alumni support. Cutting off funding entirely, however, would harm the very students public universities aim to serve. Call for balanced financial reform. Financial reforms are necessary to improve the quality of education, but public universities should not be transformed into for-profit institutions. They should continue to serve as a path for equal opportunity in education. Crux, a foreign lender-backed plan to make public universities self-sustainable by removing government funding and raising fees, risks excluding lower-income students from higher education. While financial reforms are needed, public universities should not become corporate entities that prioritize profit over accessibility for all students. Key points. Rescue of kidnapped children in AJK. A recent operation by the Lahore Organized Crime Unit and AJK police rescued 29 children and youth, aged 14 to 20, who were abducted by a child trafficking cartel from Lahore. The victims suffered repeated sexual abuse, highlighting the severe safety risks faced by children across Pakistan. Long-standing issue of child abuse, child rights violations, and abuse have plagued the country for decades, and despite frequent news of raids and rescues, the overall protection of children remains insufficient. This points to systemic failures in safeguarding the country's youth. Inadequate social protection policies. A critical issue is the lack of a basic database for children, like birth certificates, which renders many state efforts ineffective. Without proper identification and tracking, social protection policies fail to adequately protect children, especially in vulnerable areas like Punjab. Need for cross-sectoral and international efforts. A broken economy exacerbates child exploitation, necessitating cross-sectoral efforts to improve education, provide income opportunities for poor families, and engage internationally to adhere to global humanitarian standards. Stronger legal frameworks and severe penalties are also essential to ensure justice for abused children. Court and legal systems role. The courts must adopt a stricter stance on child abuse cases to ensure that law enforcement and prosecutors gather solid evidence to increase conviction rates. Only then can justice be served and laws properly implemented. Crux, the rescue of kidnapped children in AJK, is a stark reminder of the widespread child abuse in Pakistan, exacerbated by weak social protection policies and an inadequate legal framework. Urgent reforms are needed to create a reliable database of children, address economic issues, and strengthen law enforcement efforts to protect the country's future generations.